Hi there, I'm Haruka. First of all, I've noticed that my videos get more views when I talk about manga that's kind of obscure but still has a solid fan base. I see this as an absolute win because that's the kind of videos I want to make, so I'll do my best to make more of them. This time around, I want to talk about a manga that looks stupid on face value, but is actually an amazing and intricate thriller comparable to the works of Alfred Hitchcock. The full name of this manga is Ore no Genjitsu wa Renai Game ka to Omottara Inochigake no Game datta. There is no shorter name. I couldn't even find an official English name translation, so I have no clue what I should call it. So for lack of a more knowledgeable person, I shall be the one to dub the Ore no Genjitsu. I just needed something to say when talking about it, so we'll work with this for now. While I would prefer to make videos about manga that have already finished, I really feel the need to make a video about this ongoing manga because I just really think it's just so good. I'm going to spoil the first arc, which is just the first 3 chapters, and there's also a few contextual spoilers, but I'll do my best to avoid them. It's a mystery manga, you're gonna run into these sort of issues. So yeah, a vague blanket spoiler alert, even though I don't think I give away anything that twisty, just characters. Right, the first arc of the story. One day, professional NEET Ryo Hasegawa wakes up to discover a folder in the corner of his vision. Turns out he's in some sort of video game where he's got the ability to save, load, check his stats, and buy items from an in-menu shop. Also, there's something on the items about how they help him assault women? Anyway, Ryo decides to try exactly that, sneaking into his neighbor's house where he is arrested very quickly after he decides to, well, assault the woman. Or maybe it is, he got a message saying that he has a time limit to seek pleasure. At the very least, Ryo realizes that he needs to solve mysteries, not take advantage of sleeping women. But this ain't Nancy Drew, because he finds out that the hot neighbor lady is actually a murderer who's been seducing and drugging men so she could steal their money. It takes way too long for Ryo to figure this out because he still doesn't get it even when he's inside of her house. But once he chases him with a knife, he uses an item to pacify her and then calls the cops to pick up all the dead bodies. He gets a mission clear and some rewards like money and experience points. That's the first 3 chapters. It's up to 45 now, and it's gotten fairly complicated since then. The objective of the game appears to be to choose a target, find out their secret, and then solve it. That's what assault means. Whether they're evil and need to be stopped, innocent and need to be saved, or somewhere in between. He also can't switch targets, so he's got to make his choice carefully. Also, I mentioned this before, but he's got a time limit on him. He has 8,760 hours to seek pleasure and clear all missions. This is probably something with translation that makes it sound weird, but that gives him an entire year to reach his objective or else he will die in real life. But it's not all that bad. Any money he earns in the game will be transferred to his real-life bank account when he finishes the game, which is very helpful since he gets a ton of money from missions. It's not the only thing he might be able to bring back, but we'll get to that later. The items he uses are actually really important to talk about because he has a save and load feature in this game. He can save whenever he feels safe, and if anything goes wrong, he can load back to that save point. Something going wrong, like being arrested for assaulting a woman or being poisoned by cyanide. But it does cost some money to load, like $100. As for other heavily used items, he's got the Unseen Blade, which is a defensive weapon to keep him from getting hit by any attack he can see. Then there's also the multi-purpose key to open any lock and the tranquilizer spray, which does exactly what it says on the tin. Also, he gets a stopwatch that one time that helps him stop time. So that was neat, but the big thing that he learns about is the gacha system, which instead of straight up buying items from the shop, he can essentially roll for a prize to get secret items, which are much more helpful. Using someone else's luck, he got a big stat boost, a literal reset button, and something called the Black Ball. It's a secret tool that we'll need later. But a big thing to talk about is the interesting role that women play in this manga. Because this is a game and everyone else is an NPC, they're pretty much treated like objects. But at the same time, it feels like the real world, and they are still very real people. So the way Ryo treats them at times feels a bit off. In fact, overall, the manga itself doesn't quite have the nuanced sound of fully 3-dimensional women. There's also a bigger function of the game where there is an affection level attached to every woman. On Ryo's Scouter, each woman has a difficulty level for their mission and an affection level. When the game ends, any girl with an affection level of 80 or higher is brought to you into the real world. The game says something about a girl of similar appearance existing in the real world but not actually a character in the game. The text isn't clear, and while affection level is capped at 100, it can go over. It's just the game says that bad things might happen if it does, likely yandere things. So let's actually talk about the 2 main girls he builds an affection level for, Urea Kusora and Yuna Hikami. Ryo found Kusora while walking down the street when she offers her body to him for only $200. What a steal! She had a difficulty of A, so Ryo was obviously concerned. Anyway, it turns out that she's not a prostitute, but an extremely powerful captain of a Yakuza family. And she's only 19. She's so powerful that back in high school she used to order classmates around for fun, telling one guy to jump out the window. But this power not only isolates her emotionally to the point where she doesn't know basic normal things, she is also incredibly bored because she has already felt the rush of controlling the most politically powerful people in the country. So Kusora takes an interest in Ryo because he doesn't actually take her up on the offer for sex. Instead, he takes her out for ramen, which she's never had before. And even after he finds out who she is, Ryo continues to show her a normal good time, like buying rice balls from Lawson's or going to karaoke. She's never had a companion before that could make her heart flutter like this, that could break her out of her deep existential boredom. But lest we forget, Yurei Kusora is not a cute, innocent girl. She is self-proclaimed as a woman who is not going to heaven. She is absolutely ruthless and is responsible for a whole lot of lives being lost. She takes a special pleasure in fucking with Ryo and threatening his life because she believes that that will be what breaks her out of her boredom. But even through those power moves, she still very clearly trusts Ryo and might even love him. Then there's Hikami, a girl Ryo found one night at a ramen stall. He followed her from the stall because he thought she might have a mission, and it turns out she did. She also had a big old sword and a job as a fixer. She tries to kill him, but somehow he instantly seduces her by literally just telling her she was pretty. Eventually, he joins in on her job to investigate a politician. Hikami is a badass swordswoman, but she also has a lot of incredibly weird quirks about her. By the time he learns her name, Ryo already works her up to an affection level of 60. She's also got a brocon complex and is really into younger men like Ryo, which makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Also making everyone uncomfortable is her obsessive love for milk. Like, her fridge only has milk. She stops an investigation one time because she found a brand of milk she hasn't had yet. She is pushed into action after finding out someone lied to her about not having milk. But Hikami is this way for a reason. She lost her brother at a young age, leading to her complex about wanting to protect younger men. She was also bullied at her dojo and told she was ugly. Looking at the images of the other girls, I think it's more that she was just the odd one out. But because of this bullying, she was forced to drink a lot of milk. Like, mouth held open, force-fed milk. To the point where she eventually began to believe that the only way for her to improve was to just drink as much milk as possible, which honestly still doesn't explain that part of her personality. These two girls actually know each other. Hikami has actually worked on a few investigations for Kusora already, and while Hikami obviously treats the powerful Kusora with respect, Kusora actually struggles with jealousy when seeing Hikami get anywhere close to Ryo. Anyway, it's time to actually get into the Hitchcock elements of this manga. Here are some of the major themes and tropes that Ori no Genjitsu uses that are common among Hitchcock films. First is the everyman in a not-so-everyday situation. Many Hitchcock films are built around the sort of everyman character that is thrust into a dangerous world of espionage and crime that they need to quickly adapt to in order to survive. This can be an innocent man accused of a crime he didn't commit, like in North by Northwest, or something like having access to information that puts their life on the line, like in The Man Who Knew Too Much. In Ori no Genjitsu, Ryo is just a normal person who is forced into working under dangerous circumstances because the game requires him to get involved. And because of his involvement, people like Hikami assume that he has the abilities of a fixer to be able to do all this, but he's really just a NEET still. Next is the restricted setting, which is famous in Hitchcock's Rear Window and Lifeboat. By employing the use of single setting stories, Hitchcock restricts the actions that can be taken. When all other matters are the same, the only things that can change are the characters, making any sort of change more noticeable and compelling. While there's not very often a situation where Ryo is stuck in a specific setting for too long, the save and load feature creates a time loop that repeats, restricting not only the setting, but the reactions of other characters that are bound by the game's programming. It adds tension in a similar way with Ryo learning more on each load, as well as a recent development with things changing on their own between loads. Finally, the biggest Hitchcock trope I want to talk about in regards to Ori no Genjitsu is the way women are used in the story. There's a whole bunch of topics to talk about with Hitchcock when it comes to women. There's the male gaze, which is a concept that comes from the idea of a power difference between the active and dominant gazer versus the passive and submissive gazed upon. It was Hitchcock films that were used as the basis of a paper on how the heterosexual male gaze belittled women and turned them into simple objects of desire on film. Then there's also the icy blonde archetype. Pretty much all women in Hitchcock films were blonde or at least wearing a blonde wig. The victims, the leads, everyone. Hitchcock even went as far to say that brunettes were suspicious. But these blondes did have a very common theme in that almost all of them were somewhat remote, untouchable, and mostly untrustworthy. An intensified version of the femme fatale. And finally, the mother. Alfred Hitchcock's relationship with his mother is probably one of the most well-documented in history next to Sigmund Freud. He constantly used the mother figure to show an abusive and domineering presence. She was always a villain, a grotesque side character for the male lead to overcome. Now, I don't think this is intentional, but reading through the Hitchcock tropes while thinking about Ori no Genjitsu, I started to realize that the manga actually challenges and subverts a lot of these tropes surrounding women. The male gaze, while not completely abolished, is still turned on its side. Ryo comes into the game with the idea that these women are simply objects, NPCs meant to utilize a means to an end. And, well, they are NPCs. But when considering the actual plot progression, these women are not passive in their time in the story. They are active. They are very active. And because they are so integral to the plot, many affect change in the story and affect change in other characters. Also, even if the game places these women like objects, it still rewards Ryo for taking the time to not just view these girls as simple conquests, whether it be not viewing the neighbor as a physical conquest, or a different target as simply someone to be stopped. Hell, by choosing not to view Kusora as a sexual conquest, he gains a very powerful ally. Then there's the Ice Queen character, who is not blonde, but I'll explain. Kusora is the exact image of the Japanese version of the Ice Queen trope. Jet black hair, intense eyes, wearing mostly traditional clothes. But instead of being a powerless victim or a manipulative rat, Kusora is a dominating presence that has no reason to lie or manipulate because she could end you in an instant. She asserts this to multiple people throughout the manga and even proves it at times. And above all, she rejects the traditional male gaze, at times taking control of the gaze herself or forcing Ryo into the passive position. Finally, instead of the mother, we get an One-san. Hikami's trauma has actually built her into something of an overbearing mother-type person. It's not just Ryo, she does this to pretty much any man because she still has this thing in her head about how every younger man is just like her younger brother. It's incredibly off-putting. But the thing is, when Ryo accepts her love, she is openly loving and warm to Ryo. It's entirely different from the mother character that Hitchcock constantly used, which is usually a character that is to be despised or feared. Also, Hikami has a weird association with milk. Yeah, I'm not sure this subversion was intentional, and it's just weird how much of it fits together. Also, it's not really completely subversive to these negative tropes. There's still victims who are portrayed in a sexual manner, even one notable blonde victim in a shower, and there are still plenty of women used as tools or objects. Then again, Ryu sort of uses all the NPCs in that way. With the story ongoing and incomplete, there's no telling if the relationships will change in a way that begins to reinforce the negative tropes. Or maybe it goes in the positive direction and further subverts. Really, it honestly doesn't even have a lot of the other big classic Hitchcock tropes like the MacGuffin, his weird thing for voyeurism, and while the cops aren't exactly helpful, they are portrayed as idiots like in classic Hitchcock films. But in the end, Ori no Genjitsu is still a really good thriller mystery manga for those who want to ride that twist as hard as it can. It may not exactly be like Hitchcock or even intentionally subverting Hitchcock, but I can say that if you want Hitchcock with anime titties, this is where you look. Why did I have to say that after spending an entire portion of this video dedicated to feminist film theory? Thank you for watching. I hope you liked this video. I really like this manga. I don't know where you can get it legally. I'm sorry. I don't know where you can get it legally. I'm sorry. But hey, join these people. It's probably just gonna be this one person here, who are my patrons. I like them. The one guy currently, I like him. He's a good guy. You should pay me money. I've got a newsletter and it's fun. I've had a lot of alcohol to get through this, so subscribe, like, be ready for the next video.